Hi. All right, I'm going to share with you a few of my insights of working in this industry for a while, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end if you've got any questions. So I want to tell you a little story first, and this is about why and how I got interested in this. So $10 million is a lot of money. You can do a lot of things with $10 million. Invest in R&D, new technology, maybe buy a business. But once I had to write off $10 million, it was a very painful process. I was working for an organisation that had identified low carb as a great trend that they wanted to get on top of. We manufactured a lot of products through a third party to meet this trend. We did a whole lot of research, the consumers loved it. We had cereal bars and cereals and all sorts of other things. We were launching a new brand. The retailers loved it. It was doing really well in other markets overseas, and so we thought we'd jump on the bandwagon and launch it here in Australia. And this was a really big company. This was Unilever, very good at creating brands, very good at creating products. So we were going to get it all manufactured through a third party, long lead times, and big minimum order quantities, but we were confident. We had it all right. So we launched, and it failed abysmally. What we hadn't thought to think about was who else would be looking at this market? Who else would be interested, and how capable would they be? So we were beaten to market by one of the big cereal producers who could do all this stuff in-house, much higher margins. They saw us as a threat and went really aggressively on price. They promoted it heavily, invested in media. It was quite clear that they wanted us out of the market very quickly, and we were out of the market within 6 months. And I had to write off $10 million of stock. It was a very painful experience. We'd spent months and months preparing, collaborating with third parties to make this product, investing in a new brand, all that work. Pretty much 6 months in market, it was gone. So I kind of vowed from then on, I was the finance manager on the role at that point, that I would take a much more proactive interest in what was going on in the competitive landscape. Because if we'd really stopped and thought harder about who our competitors were going to be, we would have predicted this better. So that's what led me to start investigating the world of competitive intelligence, and particularly wargaming. So who am I? I'm Rachel Way. I work for Quest Worldwide, which is a great consultancy. We help leaders make better strategic decisions, essentially. And part of what I do is running war games. One of my nicknames is the Ethical Spy. And I earned this nickname when later in my career at Unilever, I became a competitive intelligence manager in their global home care business. It's a 10 billion euro business, and I used to monitor what the competitors were doing at that level around the world. And it was ethical because so much of what I learnt was what you could do with information that was publicly available. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But I loved the job. I loved getting insights about the competitive environment and seeing how that could help shape long-term strategy and short-term tactics. And one of the key things that I loved doing was running war games. I'd be sent to Singapore, sent to Thailand, sent to wherever there was a hotspot of competition in my category, and I would help those countries compete better with the likes of Procter & Gamble or Reckitt or Cow or whoever it was. So there were a couple of things that I learnt in that, and one was you get better solutions when you get a lot of people thinking strategically about a problem. And the other real thing was the power of having the group involved, having a big cross-functional group of people involved in trying to understand the problem and solve the problem. You got a lot more conviction and support for what you were going to do if you could get people to believe the why. And the war game process really helped with that. So I said that my nickname was an ethical spy, but I am also a singer. I sing regularly at the Opera House. I'm up there somewhere. I practice maybe 34, 40 hours for a performance. A lot of practice, a lot of time. I practice because it helps me with my nerves, it helps me learn the music, it helps me anticipate what if the conductor's going to speed up here or slow down there. It helps me not let my teammates, my fellow choristers, down. But what do we do as athletes, musicians, actors? We wouldn't dream of going in to do what we do without practicing. But how do we practice in business? Well, we sometimes do some research, but often it's what happens in the marketplace. We go out and we compete in the marketplace, and we hope that we learn through our mistakes, and we hope we learn from what goes well, but we don't often practice. But what if we could practice to help us move forward with more confidence as a team before we go into the arena of the marketplace? What if we could practice to help us learn what some of those big risks are and identify those and work on those before they could happen? Well, wargaming is a great practice tool that you can use in your business environment, which will end up probably saving you a lot of money and heartache down the track. Has anyone been involved in a wargame before? A handful of you, okay, and a larger number who haven't. It's really interesting. I've been to a couple of conferences in the US where competitive intelligence and wargaming is much more heavily used than it is in this market. In Europe, it's much more heavily used than it is in this market. So I'm doing my bit to wave the flag for wargaming in ANZ. So today, I'm going to talk you through competitive intelligence, what it is and how you can ethically spy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what wargaming is, for those of you that don't know, when and why we deploy wargames, a little story about chocolate that I love. I'm going to talk about how we get it right, how we can get it wrong, what impact it can have on your business, but why it's so often overlooked, and then what you can do about it tomorrow when you go back to your businesses. Lastly, we're going to fit in a bit of Q&A. All right, so stay with me for the journey. So what is competitive intelligence and how can you ethically spy? I've talked a little bit about working in competitive intelligence as my background, but I want to explain this before we go into wargaming because I think it's important that you understand the context and what we mean by competitive intelligence. So my definition, it's the creation of actionable insights about a company's external environment, which enables them to better anticipate external change and outsmart the competition. So let's break that down a little bit. Creation of insights about your competitive landscape. Well, how do we create insights? We have data points, we look at relationships between different pieces of... We kind of try and pull the pieces of the puzzle together. So, from actively monitoring when and where Procter & Gamble used to launch their products in the laundry category around the world, I built up a database. What they did, when, where. And that information helped me realise where they would use test markets, which markets they would test particular products. And they would do that before they rolled them out on bigger scale into the region and then ultimately into the bigger markets of North America, Europe, and the little market of Australasia, which generally copies North America and Europe. But following their brand and product footprint around the world, we began to see these patterns, and then we could anticipate what was coming next. And that was really valuable information and insights for my company. But how do we find out information about the competition? Well, I've got a few top tips. And I'm going to say, of course, there are lots of studies that you can buy. Nielsen provides data, Gartner Group. There's lots of information that you can buy. But aside from that, or in place of that, if you don't have the money for those research budgets, here are my top tips. Firstly, always abide by the law and by your company's code of conduct. And this is a biggie. I was sitting in head office of Unilever in London where people would be so excited and they'd tell me they just, found this product and it was off the back of a bus, literally, or perhaps on a customer's desk that they shouldn't have stolen at a meeting or something like that. So I had a responsibility never to share that information. But you've got to build a culture around using information that's in the public domain and that doesn't involve theft or skullduggery or anything else. So Australian competition law prohibits you from acting in a way that's essentially anti-competitive, such as a misuse of market power. So anything that is confidential from your competitor, you shouldn't be using. But there's a lot of stuff in the public domain, which I will talk to you about. There is a grey zone in competitor research, so I just caution you, always speak to your legal counsel, whoever that be, internal, external, if you're concerned about this. There have been millions and millions of dollars spent in court and out of court settling cases between companies that have done the wrong thing. So my second tip is that the internet and social media can be your best friend. And the reason for this is that people like to talk about what they do. They love to share. You go to LinkedIn, I've found some classics on LinkedIn where people talk about, I've just been promoted and this is how much media investment money I've got to spend and this is our strategic plan and this is what we're going to do. There's so much information in the public domain that when you start pulling the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle together, lead you to have a much better understanding of your competitor. I'll talk through one example. I was working a few years ago for an ice cream company, and it was a very big ice cream company, and their competitor that they used to always look at was another very big ice cream company. Their gaze was firmly at each other, even to the point where I know that the MDs sent each other messages on New Year's Day saying, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you this year. You know, it was all about competition between these two guys. And little by little, a third player was starting to steal share. SharePoint here, SharePoint there, kind of staying under the radar though. The company I was working with, when it was raised that maybe they should start looking a little bit at this other one, was like the common knowledge in the company, the common thought was, you know, we don't have much to fear with this company. They use co-manufacturers for most of what they do. They don't have the capability in-house. They're just playing a short-term game to make a bit of money. Well, I started doing a bit of research and I went to the place where this company was based and looked up in their local media, and I found a construction and engineering company talking about how they'd done a factory overhaul. I delved deeper, found a full presentation about what this company had built for the ice cream company, the number of new lines they'd put in, what these new lines were capable of producing, how much they'd invested in it, and how this was part of a big strategic long-term play that this third player was going to make in the marketplace. So taking this information back to the ice cream company I was working with, this was very different. This was a big strategic play that this third party was playing. And so my company that I was working with needed to look a lot more at this company. So there is a lot of information on the public domain that is free, that will give you great insights into your competition. You just have to know how to look. My third piece of advice is talk to people in your company. They often know a lot more than you realise. Again, I'll caution this with there are legal obligations. You can't ask people to disclose information that is confidential or part of their former employment with someone else. But you talk to someone who deals with your suppliers. Maybe they've heard, oh, you know, that company, it's being really late with its payments. Oh, talk to another media agency. Oh, you know, they normally turn up to these trade shows. They haven't turned up this year. And then you talk to someone else. Oh, you know, my friend, he's just been made redundant. His team's been made redundant. That shows a picture of a company that's in trouble. So just ask around and you can pick up lots of pieces of information, which if you put it all together in a central location and then can use in the business, will be very powerful. How you compete with someone in difficult economic situation is very different to how you compete with someone that you think is very strong. So What do we do with this? I've talked about competitive intelligence. Well, there's no point in having these insights about your competition unless you can make them actionable, and this is really important. So having the information in the hands of the decision makers in a timely way that can really influence what they do. And really, this is where wargaming can come in. Wargaming is a great way to give information to the right people to think about it themselves and get them to make decisions in a really fast and effective way. So what do we do with that insight that I told you about the ice cream player? We wargamed out their strategy. So if we were them, and this is what we'd invested in, and this is what we had the capability of doing, where would we go? Who would we attack? Where would we get our share from? What would our plans be? We worked all that out. And as a result, the company I worked for went and bought someone that could more effectively compete with them because they couldn't compete with their brands. And it would take a couple of years probably to get a brand that strong. So they bought another one that could do it. So, on to wargaming. What is wargaming? I like these quotes from Sun Tzu. I'll give you a moment to just read them. So it's about knowing yourself. That's a really important one. Knowing your enemy, or your co-competitors, your competitors, and rehearsing. I talked about practice before. So Hannibal was infamous for his meticulous planning against the numerically superior Roman army. So the Battle of Cannae, I think Hannibal had about 35,000 troops or so, and the Romans had about 72,000 troops. He'd studied how the Romans had fought. He knew they would go on the offensive, and he knew where they wouldn't be watching. So he planned a retreat, a partial retreat, and then he outflanked them, came from behind and managed to encircle them. And on that day of the Battle of Cannae, I think 60,000 soldiers were killed. So wargaming has been going on for thousands of years in the military. Fast forward now, politicians use it, businesses use it. In essence, it's the same thing. It's nothing more than role-playing what someone else is going to do in order to understand their behaviour and what you need to do as a result. It's nothing more than that. And if you can practice before you go into the marketplace, you have a much greater chance of success. So a war game, it's structured, it's facilitated, and it's a live simulation workshop. I say live simulation because things evolve during the sessions. We can't predict everything that's going to come. It's grounded in fact-based insights, and that's where the research comes in, and it uses role play, allowing participants to predict and plan for future activity in the competitive landscape. So I'm going to take you through what a typical wargame structure would be, and I'll preface this by saying every wargame is different. It's always dependent on the situation of where the client's at, how far along the journey they are with whatever their plans are. But this is a typical structure. So in the first round, we might have 3 or 4 teams that break up into some small working sessions, and they will be given a scenario or a couple of scenarios to work through, usually acting as the competitor. And they're tasked to go through certain activities to help with their strategic thinking, and they come up with a point of view of, if we are competitor A, how are we going to resolve this situation? What solution are we going to develop to cope with the scenario in front of us? They'll share that with the broader group, and there'll be often very divergent opinions. A smaller group then will go and distill those key learnings, those aha moments. What have we learnt about ourselves through this? What have we learnt about our industry through this? And what have we learnt about the competitors through this? And they'll turn those insights into understanding, well, if the competition were to do these things, as we've heard, these things that we think are most credible, most likely to happen, then what are the key risks to our strategy? What are the key risks to our plans? What do we need to look at in more depth? So they'll determine at the end of the first round what those things are that we need to focus on. On the second round, usually, and I say usually because it always varies, they'll then go back as their own company and think, okay, we've been given these 3 risks we need to mitigate, and this opportunity we really need to exploit further. Let's look at our plans and let's look at what we can do differently. Let's make sure that we don't leave any of that area exposed to the competitors that we had in the first round. So typically, they will work through, again, in small teams. Small teams are good at problem solving, big teams aren't, so I always break it into small teams. Come back and share, and again, have a small leadership group distill the insights again. They might have a whole host of suggestions come through. This is a really creative session where you back as your company, you're thinking, there's so many things we can do to stop that competitor hurting us. Loads and loads of ideas, many of which will be far beyond what your company may be able to afford. So the small group will distill that down to what are the cracker ideas? What are the things we really must do no matter what? And they'll choose them to go into the third round. Third round, work through those ideas, really problem solving and action planning. What are we going to do about this threat? What are we going to mitigate against? So I'll give you an example. I should have said earlier, I sign confidentiality agreements with all my clients. So at times I can't talk names. There's 1 or 2 where I can, but at times I can't. But an example here, I ran a war game in the beverages industry, and there was a big global acquisition happening. And my competitor wanted to know what impact is that going to have in the local market. So for them, because this global acquisition was going to happen, their chief competitor was going to gain a lot of market share. My client were going from number 1 in the market to a distant number 2 as a result of this acquisition. So they wanted to know, how do we compete now with these guys? They're owned by different people, they've got a different culture, and they now have a lot more market power than they did before. So in the first round, we acted as the competitor, and we found all the hotspots. Where are the hotspots of competition most likely to be now in the marketplace, given that this has occurred? And what we did find, interestingly, was that there are a few cool spots where we didn't think the competition, looking at a few of the players, were really going to go after. And what we realised was that my client had a couple of really strong brands that they hadn't activated in this space for a couple of years. So that was the aha moment. The aha moment was, we've got this great brand equity that we've done not much with. Let's actually work on that. There were some defensive actions as well, but I'm going to take you through the more proactive ones. So in the next round, they looked at, well, what could we do with these brands? How could we make them part of our armoury to fight these competitors? And then when it came down to the third round, they basically had a signed-off marketing investment to spend a whole lot more money on these brands because they were going to play a much more strategic role in the future of their business. So they worked that out in, a day and a half, changed quite a bit of their marketing strategy. So that's my typical 3-round structure. It may be over a day and a half to 2 days. So there's one thing that I wanted to say. And no matter what happens with a war game, we want to get you out of your comfort zone. It's really important that we can get participants to critique their own plans, critique their own strategy, possibly even critique their own org structure if needed be. They need to be taken out of their comfort zone and feel that they're in an environment where they can do that, and role play is part of what can allow that to happen. So we encourage this purposeful intention to take you out of your comfort zone, and it can be quite difficult for people at first, and then they really, really get into it. Yanking participants out of their comfort zone will help them overcome some unknown biases and give them a fresh, more realistic perspective of their relative strengths and weaknesses in the marketplace. So when and why would we deploy war games? Well, there are sort of three key times when we want to do it. One is when you're on the offence, when you're planning to disrupt the market. Maybe you're making an acquisition, you're launching a new brand, you're going into new geographies, you're changing your proposition significantly for the customer or end consumer, be that pricing or your message, etc. But when you're leading the charge and you want to know, what am I up against if I do this? Secondly, when one of or more of your competitors is going to do one of those things. Often there's rumours, sometimes there's facts, but when there's enough to make you believe that this is likely to be coming, and signals can be given in many different areas if you're picking up on those signals, then do one on your competitor or competitors. Thirdly, this is a realignment one. When you think the market's going to realign as a result of an external activity that isn't about you or your competitor, but maybe it's the regulator who's suddenly going to change pricing. Maybe there's a shorter supply of one of the key materials, which is going to have a big impact on margins in the business, etc., etc. I like to call this one the cat amongst the pigeons. And this is because everyone's going to go up and react, and then everyone's going to settle again. But you want to make sure you do it in a way where you can protect yourself as much as you can and hopefully also advance your position in the market. So they're the three areas typically that we wargame. And now I'm going to tell you a little bit. Who likes chocolate? Anyone else like chocolate? Yeah, I would love a chocolate right now. All right, I love chocolate. My husband's here, he knows that I love chocolate. This is a story about these chocolates. Has anyone tried them yet? Yeah? Yeah? Okay, so this range of Arnott's chocolates was launched just a few months ago. And back in 2017, I had a call from them to say, hey, can you come and have a chat with us about this? So I am allowed to talk about this story. This one's, I've spoken to them. So back in 2017, this was an exciting innovation project, mostly being driven by marketing. They were advancing the project quite rapidly. They were really enthusiastic. They'd done some great market research who said consumers were going to love it. They'd had some high-level discussion with some of their key customers, the retailers, who said, we're going to love it. Full steam ahead. And someone called me in and said, I want to talk to you about this for a couple of reasons. One is, we're not sure as a total business if we're up for the risk. Do we understand the risk? And the person I spoke to there actually said to me, Rach, we've spent a lot of money on research already, but we do not have any idea of the competitive dynamics. Research will tell us consumers love it, but we really need to understand the competitive dynamics. So, can you come and help us? So, the opportunity for this was huge. I mean, chocolate is an enormous, expandable consumption category available anywhere you choose to buy chocolate. Anywhere you choose to shop, you can pretty much find chocolate. Enormous opportunity for a company like Arnott's who make biscuits. Biscuits, less impulsive category, very well-loved, respected heritage brands. But how could they get into this more innovative, exciting and bigger consumption opportunity? So I needed, when I was planning the wargame, to think about two things. The rational, how? How would they do this? How do I get people to think about, should we launch or shouldn't we launch? And if we launch, how do we optimise that launch? But the second was the emotional. I really need to think about, there are some people that are not on this journey. They feel they're being a bit steamrolled by marketing, potentially. They have a voice. They may be responsible for, I'm not giving names, but, for production, for supply chain, for finance, even for sales. They need a voice. So how do I prepare this in a way where all those divergent opinions can come to the fore, and then we have a chance to choose the best solution for the business and to move forward? So that's what I did. So I ran a war game to help show them what the risks and opportunities would be with launching and exploring, if they went ahead, how to optimise their chances of success. Now, chocolate, yes, big category, lots of money, but you're also up against Cadbury, Mondelez, Nestle, pretty big player, Lindt, very experienced players in this market. For Arnott's, they were operating in biscuits, which they largely dominate. Very different category dynamics to chocolate, which is high impulse, high innovation, high levels of spend, media investment, as well as promotional investment. So we spent a lot of time educating the group around what the category dynamics were like, and then exploring with those category dynamics what the opportunities were for Arnott's. We looked at different scenarios of how Arnott's could launch, and helping them trying to find their sweet spot, both in terms of proposition, but also pricing, what channels they would enter, perhaps sequencing of channels. We looked at all these different things to help them come up with the optimal mix. And then it was put back to the exec team based on everything we know. Are you going to launch? So based on all the insights we got from this war game, so they went ahead and decided to launch. And I should have had some products to share with you now. But anyway, this was a war game where we were acting on the offence, where they wanted to be very proactive in understanding the marketplace. And they got me involved really early on, which meant that all these insights could go into their marketing mix. It was not too late. Sometimes people call you at the 11th hour and it's like, well, it's not a lot we can really change now. But this was a really good example of them thinking very strategically about how they could optimise their mix. So, how do we get war games right? Firstly, we need to prepare for them properly. I spoke to you earlier about research. So doing the right level of research, planning for the research properly, and trying to gain some good insights is important. But also, how do you share that? So yes, you can send a pre-read before a workshop, but how do you also get your participants to engage in a bit more experiential learning? Talking to perhaps consumers or lovers of other brands or other companies. Getting them to taste the products, getting them to go and experience the service of your competitor. So get them into that experiential mindset. So that helps them understand a little bit more about the competitor than just reading something. Think about your participants. Really important to get a cross-section of people present. So I talked about how it's important to get buy-in, alignment behind decisions and then the execution. So who are the people that are going to be really involved in this project moving forward? If your factory is a big part of this, or your IT department is going to be a big part of what you are going to do as a result of this, make sure that you get all those people involved. Make sure you get legal involved. Always have them present, or at least aware of what you're doing and signed off on what you're doing. Great to have trusted third parties in, agencies. A lot of the war games I've run, we have our agency partners in as well. Often understand from a fresh perspective and have some good external insights to bring. The sweet spot's about 20 to 25 people. You can do it with a few more, you can do it with a few less, but that's a good number to try and run with. And then the third bit about preparing, I always caution people against holding these things at an in-house venue, because you need a big plenary room for all those people, you need breakout rooms, and you need 100% of people's focus. I would often start these days, and I should preface this, but I first experienced war games not as a facilitator, but as a participant, and I really relished a day and a half, 2 days out of the business to really think strategically about the work that I was doing, think big picture. And for most of the people that do that they love that. But if they're in the office being distracted by the firefighting, it's really hard for them to focus and give their best. So, prepare for them properly. Secondly, use role play to think outside of the box. In business, we're not really used to creative role play, but there are some really great benefits from this. And don't laugh at the costumes. I once ran one in India, and I flew in from London and I arrived, and they had decked out the whole room with like military camouflage, and they had made a video. This was a Bollywood-style video. They'd taken an Indian film and dubbed it. And the baddies were the competitor and the goodies were them. It was hysterical. They got so into character, absolutely loved it. So costume can help people get into character, thinking more as a competitor. So can language. So whenever you're acting, role-playing, being the competitor, trying to think as they would think, try and use the language of, we, the competitor, we do this, and they, the company you really work for, they do that. It really helps people to switch their mind and think about things from a different perspective. It can be lots of fun. People can really enjoy it, and it might be a bit clunky at first while they get used to it, and then they really get into it and they love it. And direct experiential learning for participants can lead to much more honest realisations about their own company. Thirdly, entrust a safe pair of hands to facilitate your war games. That could be someone internal, could be someone external. But there's a lot to do to make sure that it's not just a talk fest and that you actually are driving towards tangible outcomes and that you are enabling all the participants to really be heard and give their perspectives. Thirdly, embrace the art of the swag. Now, can anyone tell me what the art of the swag is? Okay, it's a scientific wild-ass guess. So, when you are working in war games, you have data points, you have insights, but you don't have certainty. You cannot predict with 100% certainty what your competitors are going to do. You're never going to be able to. What you can do is use the information, the insights, the experience of the group there and make the best decisions you can. So making an imperfect decision is better than making no decision at all. I think the taxi industry will probably agree with me on that one. But embrace this. It can be really useful. Next, make sure that as part of planning your war game, you get as many actionable decisions and commitments as you can on the day. So if you can, get it pointy at the end, make people make decisions. Otherwise, they go back into their day jobs. It's hard to get people back together to make those commitments afterwards. And use them sparingly. Like, avoid war games fatigue. I've been in organisations, war game this one, war game that one, and it takes a lot of work to do them properly, to really do them properly. So don't do overkill, they'll lose their power. How can we get it wrong? So firstly, when a war game isn't the right solution to your problem, if you want to understand how is it that my competitor can underprice me and still make money, I don't get it. A war game's not going to answer that for you. Something like shadow costing or another competitive intelligence tool might do that. But a war game won't answer that question, so don't war game it. Secondly, if your scope is too broad or inadequately defined, you'll just waver. So make sure you do that well up front. Thirdly, when you're not committed to doing the upfront research, if you don't get quality inputs, you won't get quality outputs. It doesn't have to be really difficult to do, but you've got to do some work. Another reason why people get it wrong is if you can't get people to fully commit or the right people to attend, it's better to hold off if you can't get the people to attend, because slowing down there will lead to a much faster and more effective execution if you've got them on board to be there. I had someone call me about a war game recently and, they told me, we're doing all this and we're at this point and we're going to launch, but I just need to talk to you about running a war game beforehand. And I said, well, what have you committed to? Have you committed to your media spend? Yes. Have you committed to your packaging? Yes. Have you committed to... What's the point? You're not going to be able to change very much. So if you can't change because it's too late in the piece, or if you can't change because no matter what rational facts you take to your leader, they're not going to be willing to change their opinion, then don't waste people's time. This one here is about not having an impartial facilitator. This is a really important one, because I talked before about having these myths and biases on the table. And if you haven't got someone that can help uncover those, someone who comes from a biased perspective, then it's really hard to do. So the last one is when you have great learnings, insights and debate but no actionable outcomes. So there's no point running one, again, if you can't get it to actions at the end. Sorry, there was one more, the most important one, which is this one, which I mentioned before, when you don't abide by your company's code of conduct or your legal obligations. So a war game should never be aimed at stopping competition. It's more about how you compete more effectively. As a practical guidance, you might want to... it's too much detail, I'll go through the next slide. So, what impact can wargaming have on your business? It will give you a greater understanding of your true relative strengths and weaknesses and knowledge of your intelligence gaps. No matter what, it will do that for you. It'll give you a common understanding of when, where and how extra resourcing will really make a difference and where it won't. It'll stop that sort of panic when something happens in the marketplace that you haven't predicted and everyone goes, fight this fire. But it's like, no, we've got another business. We need to keep running all this stuff. You'll know when and where you need to fight the fires with the competitors and when you don't. It'll give you the ability to course correct before the real situation occurs in market, saving time, money and resources. It will give greater buy-in and internal alignment behind strategic choices, leading to greater energy behind execution. Ultimately, it will give you competitive advantage, which translates to market success. A couple more points here. Why are they so overlooked? Why don't we think about doing them more often? Firstly, there's the optimism bias. We come across it all the time. So the optimism bias says, this won't happen to me. Even though most of us think we're pretty prudent in how we make decisions, we all have this optimism bias. That'll never happen to me. It'll never be that bad. But the cognitive reality is that we constantly underestimate the likelihood of something happening. So be aware of the optimism bias. Secondly is poor research and analytical capability. People think, I could never get any information worthwhile about my competitors, so what's the point? Well, hopefully I've shared with you today that you can. And thirdly, this discomfort with imperfect information. You've got to be comfortable with making some decisions based on imperfect information. So, we need to embrace the art of the swag. What can you do about it tomorrow? That's what I encourage you all to become as warriors tomorrow. My top tips: become the voice of the competitor within your organisation. Try and bring that external perspective in to add some more value to conversations and discussions. Think about who and what your biggest competitive threats are right now to your business. Make a list and just share them with your colleagues. Talk about it. Start some conversations. Be curious. Make sure you keep that list updated as well. Keep an active watch on this identified list. And every time you find out some new information, think, what's a so what? Why is it important and who needs to know? And what could they do about it if they did know? And then lastly, wargame out your big plays, or those big plays of your competitors. Practice on your terms and not on theirs.